You know what's interesting about life is there's these transitional ages, right? Transitional ages. And it starts really, really young. John Ramos, of course, our technical director, they just had a baby. And there's the transitional age of when you're a newborn, right? Newborn to infant. You know, when you're a newborn, every need, you take care of every need. But at some point, whether you do Ferber, which is the Ferber method of letting them kind of cry it out and learn to self-soothe, at some point, you have to allow your baby to learn the tools to self-soothe and put itself to sleep. Right? But you don't want to do it too early because it's almost like cruel and it's really hard on the mom, hear her baby cry. But you don't want to do it too late because then all of a sudden you got a problem, right? You don't want a 4-year-old crying and in a diaper and screaming in your bed, needing its baba. The transitional ages continue like after they're 2, then they need to be in a crib, out of a crib when they get to be 3 and be in a big girl bed, big boy bed, and wear underwear. Don't want to do too early because just parts of the brain which are not developed. Don't want to do too late. In football, you have transitional ages as well. Right? You got to be very careful with these rookie quarterbacks. Don't play them too early. Dwayne Haskins. And I know that Jared Goff was probably played too early and he's recovered. I don't know if Mitch Trubisky recovered, if he was never really that good. He's really struggled early on and he's struggling now. And so the question is, did the Washington Redskins do themselves a disservice or do Dwayne Haskins a disservice playing him too early? On the other hand, if you let the guy sit too long, now guys on the team are like, they don't think he can play at all. They're not even playing him. Our season's over. You can't do it too early, but you can't do it too late. Go to the end of your career. Phillip Rivers threw 4 interceptions last night. Now, one interception was not his fault. Starting a different left tackle, gets hit from behind. It pops up into the arms of a Kansas City Chief. But the other 3 were on him. And you start to wonder, wait, if the Chargers let him walk this year, is it too late or is it too early? Because you can't make the excuse in your mind, hey, we didn't have our left tackle most of the season, didn't have him in the altitude of Mexico City. And now we didn't have our right tackle last night. We have all these different injuries. Like, look, Phillip Rivers can still play. And oh, yeah, by the way, this isn't like monkeys on a vine where you just grab the next vine. You're jumping into the great unknown, not knowing what you have. Your choices, everybody watches the Chargers last night. Like, well, that's it for Phillip Rivers. You move on. He's not under contract at the end of the year. That sounds great. What are you moving on to? You moving on to one of the retreads? You're trying to fix Marcus Mariota? You going to try and fix Jameis Winston? You going to try and fix Cam Newton? You can do that. It's possible. But there's a reason that in a sport which protects teams from losing any one of their star players that they don't want to lose. Like, if a team doesn't want to lose you, they are not losing you. They're just not losing. If they don't want you to go, you're not going anywhere. That's what the franchise tag was invented for. And at the most important position in sports, you're available, made available by your original team. It does on some level say something about what they think of your level of competency or health. So your choice of the Chargers are stick by Rivers and run the risk of it being too late and him being washed up, or do it too early and make a change for a guy who has warts of his own. Oh, and don't worry, you just draft one. Like, that's not easy. Maybe now with Tua hurt, you can draft Tua, but what if Tua's hip is never right? Or remember, you draft Tua and he doesn't play for a year. What then? And free agency is before, not after the NFL draft, unlike in basketball. So if you don't end up with a quarterback, everyone in the world knows that you're desperate to get somebody who can be a signal caller. And when you have a ready-made team, like this is a team that is ready-made to win. Melvin Gordon won a new contract, but he can be franchised next year if they don't give him a long-term deal. They have Austin Eckler under contract. They got Mike Williams under contract. They got Derwin James under contract. The only guy that's going to be an issue this upcoming offseason is going to be Joey Bosa, who's going to want the moon, the stars, and the sun. They got Melvin Ingram under contract. Like, that's a good team, a good football team. They're going to be fine, but they got to figure out the quarterback. And they're at this transitional age. They're at this spot where you're like, he's not as good as he used to be. And God, he's making some turnovers that drive you crazy. But would you prefer the transitional age of a little too old to over the hill, right? That's the two spots. To a little too young and not ready before the prime. You know, it's a really hard call. Having to understand transitional age and how it fits in with your football team is one of the most difficult parts in football. And everybody says, well, better to move on too early than too late until you move on too early. And at that position, it's really hard to find a replacement. Really, really hard. That's why they pay those guys upwards of 30 and at the end of this offseason, $40 million. Because there's just not a bunch of those guys walking around on the street. About half the guys who start in the league can actually play and play well in the entire league. Look, there's a bunch to take away from that game. Kansas City still can't run the football. I thought the altitude, anybody who thinks it's a snap, go and play games down in Mexico City every week. Like, those guys were dying. They were gassed. And that's the Chargers who spent a week in the altitude preparing for it. But the biggest takeaway is Phillip Rivers looks like most quarterbacks who are in their late 30s. And just like we told you when Adrian Peterson came off of a torn ACL and won the MVP, he's the exception, not the rule. He's an absolute unicorn. The same is true for Tom Brady. Phillip Rivers' draft class is with Eli Manning. How's this year working out for Eli Manning? With Ben Roethlisberger, whose arm broke down on him. And like Rivers this year, threw for a bunch of yards last year, but threw a ton of interceptions last year as well. His contemporaries are either out of the game or on their way out of the game. It shouldn't be. We can't compare him to Brady, just like you can't compare any running back coming off an ACL to Adrian Peterson. Those guys are unicorns. They're once in a generation, once in a lifetime, and you got to. It's like, is it the median or the mean, where you cut out the high and you cut out the low and you take the average of the rest? That's what you got to do with players in the NFL. You take out the very high. You take out the Tom Brady, who's at 42, still playing and playing pretty well. And you take out the Andrew Luck, who at 30 decided to call it quits. And everything else in the middle, that gives you a better sense. And transitional age is hard. It's hard when you're raising kids. It's hard when you got football players to know too early or too late or just right. Hi, I'm Doug Gottlieb from Fox Sports Radio, and you need to subscribe to the Fox Sports Radio YouTube channel where you can hear and see me. Why not? Plus, everybody else who's awesome here in Fox Sports Radio.